This is the second video lecture on the topic of middle adulthood. In the previous lecture, I was talking about some of the physical changes, and there were a couple things that I failed to mention that I think are kind of interesting. One where we were talking about hair and hair color. I don't know much about a graying of hair, if there's a correlation, but I can speak to and sort of connect this back to a previous chapter, and that's about like going bald. And baldness, a male pattern, or baldness in general, hair thickness of one's hair, is evidenced on the X chromosome. So you can predict the thickness of one's hair by your mother's father. Well, if you're a man, your mother's father. So remember you have the XXs, and so like if thickness of hair is on the X, and your mother's father had thick hair, then your son will probably have thick hair too, or as opposed to thinning hair. So you can blame your mother for the thickness of your hair. There's another thought I had too, but now I forget what it was. Okay, so but again, the point. Okay, so again, the point is that how we experience midlife is influenced by our younger years or our early adulthood. So in this lecture, I want to talk about some of the cognitive developments or the cognitive changes. There's this general sense, or the general, I guess you could call it a cultural myth, that one of the changes is memory loss. And the development psychologists argue, or sort of question, is there really a cognitive decline, or is it simply a cognitive change? And one of the change is pretty clear, is the shift from what we would call fluid intelligence to a crystallized intelligence. And what that means is that younger people are able to incorporate and learn new skills and faster. So it's more of a fluid, right? They move from new task to new task. But older people have what's called crystallized intelligence, and that's sort of the wisdom that comes with years, right? So things are more solidified, they've lived more experience, they've taken the ideas that they learned in their younger years and applied them to their life, and they've had more opportunities to see patterns. And this is what seems to be the strongest in middle life, is this crystallized. So some describe it as being able to see the big picture. Another term for this might be like encapsulated knowledge, right? So that all of those new ideas that they had has been sort of encapsulated. My son likes to use the metaphor of sort of the wise owl that happens during midlife. And another way of thinking about this is that they've developed an expertise. They've done things so many times, a little bit like the driving example, but they've done it so many times that they have way more experience with it and have seen lots of different examples of something because they've simply been around more years. My mother, who is 74, we were talking about how there is this sort of point in life where people believe what you say. And she said, that her experience has been that at some later point, when you get even older, they don't believe you anymore because now you're sort of outdated. But midlife seems to be that period where people believe what you say as you've developed intelligence. Some folks may decide that they want to get out of their career. They want to retire at this point. There's a couple different terms for this. One of them is phased retirement, and that we see that a lot in higher ed. And phased retirement is like you go from working 40 hours a week, teaching 5 classes, to now you're going to teach 2 classes. And I think this is for people that have spent their whole adult lives working many hours. This is the best way to sort of transition into not working for wages anymore. Another term is bridge employment. As I was typing this up, I was actually thinking of so many people I know that do this, that they go from a full-time sort of administrative position to now they're going to take a part-time where they're not the administrator, a different kind of job. They may not be drawing on their retirement, but they're still engaged in the same kind of work. It's just not at the same sort of level of rigor. And there is an abundance of evidence that says that if you continue to work in cognitive, and hopefully you remember cognitive means thinking, cognitively complex work diminishes cognitive decline. In other words, if your work continues to be about thinking, right, you will maintain the skills for thinking. Though I did just read an article from the Harvard Business College or something that said that actually in your 50s, cognitive decline happens a lot faster than we want it to. Okay, so now I'm going to shift to a little bit different focus of development, the way we've done the rest of the topics throughout the semester, and talk about how our personality development. Now, hopefully you've taken, hopefully you've taken the personality exercise, the big 5 personality scale from psychology, because that will make this all much more meaningful. But before I get to that, so Erickson's model, you remember, went through these periods of crisis. And in infancy, we had the crisis of trust. Somewhere in there, we had the crisis of ingenuity, right? In middle adulthood, so this is your 40s, your 50s, and your early 60s, the crisis is between I should have looked this up. Generanity versus stagnation. That word, that generity refers to like generations, right? And what basically the crisis is about, this is the time where people give back, right, or influence the next generation, or they don't. So they're guiding the generation as a way of passing on some sort of expertise to the next generation, or they're just stagnant. And how we figure out how to leave something behind will influence our well-being, right? Our emotional well-being. So one way that people might do this is they might start volunteering, they might start taking care of their grandchildren, they might get engaged in some sort of philanthropy if they're wealthy, but it's all about leaving something to the next generation. There's this other theory, seasons of life theory, that says that, again, this is the theory that would offer this idea of a midlife crisis. And psychologists argue that that's not necessarily, again, the best way to think about middle life. It is certainly a transition, right? It is certainly a period where maybe our children are leaving home, our friends are retiring, our friends may be dying. So it is certainly a period where we go, wow, things are. The one thing that I am so aware of is that there was a period, when I had 3 small children at home, and I had no time to myself. I had no time for hobbies, or to take naps. And now I feel like I have all of this time, and I could look at all of that time and feel like, oh my gosh, my life is empty. Or I could get back to the things that I enjoy, and that's kind of what I've been doing. I take a lot of naps and read a lot of books and do a lot of my needlepoint hobbies. But that could be a crisis. I could be experiencing this empty nest crisis, but it is certainly a transition, a time when we begin to kind of look around. And that will, of course, depend on the choices we've made earlier in our life. Do we still have friends? What kind of health we're in? What kind of financial resources we have? And then what's important to me in life. Okay, so this is the trait model that, again, if you have taken psychology or my psychology class, I have invited you to do an assignment where you take this 120-page question and you come up with these. The trait model argues that personality can be broken down into these 5 traits: openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And then you get a score. Are you high or low on these qualities? Well, the reason we talk about it here in midlife is because how we score on those things predicts how we're going to experience midlife, how we're going to experience later life, right? So a high score on openness, for instance, would probably be more open to trying new things when they get to midlife. A high score on neuroticism, which is basically like emotional instability, we will see those same sort of emotionally unstable patterns that we saw in our younger years. We're going to see them showing up again in our later years, right? If we're more extroverted, if we tend more to want to be in the company of other people, we're going to have different experiences in midlife and later life, right? That's sort of the reason that in some previous semesters, I have asked students to do that assignment in this class, but I not this semester. Okay, I'm going to stop it here. And when I come back, we're going to talk about family relationships and friendship relationships in midlife and how they change.